The hum of the servers was my constant companion, a low, rhythmic thrum against the corrugated metal walls of my mobile forensic unit at a remote location. Outside, the world was a blur of forgotten highway and skeletal trees, but inside, it was a universe of glowing screens and coiled wires, a sanctuary built for the whispers of digital ghosts. I liked it this way. No office politics, no small talk, just me and the raw data. Most days, the only calls I got were automated reminders to update my antivirus or the occasional wrong number. That suited me fine. I'd carved out a niche for myself, a reputation for untangling the most knotted digital threads, but it came with a tacit understanding. I wasn't for the everyday. I wasn't for the open and shut. I was for the cases where everything else had failed, where the official narrative felt like a poorly written script, which was why I'd barely registered the news reports about the tech CEO, a man named Sterling Vance. Rich, powerful head of some ubiquitous social media conglomerate. He'd been found in his penthouse, a bullet wound to the chest, his high-tech apartment ransacked. The city's tabloids had feasted on it for a week, and then just as quickly the official line had solidified, a robbery gone wrong. Tragic, yes, but straightforward. Case closed, or so the headlines screamed. I'd scrolled past the articles, a dismissive shrug in my internal monologue. Amateurs. If they'd already tied a bow on it, there was nothing for me to do. My expertise wasn't in confirming the obvious. My fingers danced across a holographic keyboard, sifting through a mountain of fragmented data from a cold case I'd picked up for a private firm, a decade-old corporate espionage claim. The fragments were like tiny shards of memory, each needing to be polished and reassembled. It was tedious, painstaking work, the kind that made most analysts tear their hair out, but I thrived in it. Then my secure line, the one reserved for the truly desperate, chirped. Not a ring, but a low, insistent chirp like a digital cicada. My fingers froze mid-keystroke. I glanced at the caller ID. Unknown number. Encrypted, routed through 3 different proxies, probably more. This wasn't a wrong number. This was someone who didn't want to be traced, calling someone who was equally hard to find. A familiar knot of tension tightened in my gut. My reclusive nature often meant these calls were trouble, but trouble in my line of work usually meant something interesting. I tapped the screen. User EO, I stated, my voice flat, betraying none of the sudden prickle of apprehension. User EO, a voice responded, deep and gravelly, with an undercurrent of urgency. No pleasantries. My apologies for the unconventional contact. I am a chief investigator with the city's major crimes division. I raised an eyebrow. I don't work for the city, and I don't do conventional. Precisely why I'm calling, the investigator said, a hint of impatience in his tone. This is about Sterling Vance. My initial dismissiveness returned. The robbery gone wrong, I read the reports, seems pretty wrapped up. A short, sharp sigh came through the line. That's the problem. It seems wrapped up. Too wrapped up, if you ask me, and certainly too quickly. Now this was a hook. My interest dormant moments before began to stir. And you're asking me why? Because, the investigator continued, his voice dropping slightly, while the physical evidence points to a forced entry, a struggle, and a theft. The digital footprint is almost too clean. Vance was a tech CEO. His apartment was a smart home on steroids. Every device connected, every system logged. Yet when we pulled the data, it was underwhelming. Underwhelming how? I pressed, leaning forward, my gaze sweeping over my bank of monitors. No unusual network traffic, no anomalies in his personal server logs. It's like he powered down his entire digital life before the attack. A man who lived online, suddenly offline. The investigator paused. And then there's the money. The money. His personal accounts, billions, untouched. The alleged robbers took a few antique watches, some cash from a desk drawer. Peanuts given his net worth, and his crypto wallets still full, his offshore accounts intact. It makes no sense for a high-value target like Vance. This did sound like a poorly written script. A high-profile tech mogul murdered in a robbery gone wrong, yet the real treasures were left untouched. It gnawed at me, this incongruity. The official narrative, so neat and tidy, was starting to fray around the edges. Wait, that doesn't add up. I felt a familiar thrill, the kind that only a genuine puzzle could ignite. So I think it wasn't a robbery? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. I think it was a very clever misdirection, the investigator confirmed. And I think the real crime happened entirely in the digital realm, but my team. They're good with blood spatter and ballistics. They're lost in the gigabytes. We need someone who can see the ghosts in the machine, user EO. Unconventional methods. He said, a hint of respect in his voice. I don't play by the rules, but I get results. We need I to look at everything. His personal devices, his smart home logs, his company servers if I can get access. Find what isn't there. find the digital fingerprints that were erased or never existed in the first place. I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing the chaotic scene the investigator was describing, then contrasting it with the unnervingly clean digital footprint. It was a contradiction that screamed for a closer look. My reclusive nature ward with a burgeoning professional itch. Part of me wanted to say no, to retreat back into my comfortable world of old data and quiet solitude. But another part, the part that lived for the challenge, was already piecing together the possibilities. What exactly are I offering? I finally asked, a sliver of acceptance in my tone. Full clearance, unlimited resources, and complete autonomy. No one will interfere with my process. We just need answers, user EO, the truth. Unlimited resources, complete autonomy. That was my language. My internal monologue, which had been so dismissive of the Vance case, now shifted. I doubted myself for a moment for letting the initial reports blind me to the potential complexities. Perhaps I was becoming too comfortable in my remote haven. Send me everything I have, I said, my voice firmer now, the decision made. Every raw log, every network packet, every piece of metadata my team collected, and I want access to his company's network. I'll need a secure connection established to this unit. Consider it done, the investigator said, relief evident in his voice. Expect a secure data drop within the hour. The server hum was no longer just a background noise. It was the prelude to an investigation. I leaned back, my gaze fixed on the blank screens. Time to wake the ghosts. The hum of the server racks in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location had shifted. It was no longer just background noise. It was the thrum of anticipation, a low, steady pulse against the quiet. The call with the lead investigator had ended, leaving me with a clean slate, or so they thought. Sterling Vance's physical body might be gone, but his digital imprint was what interested me. And I had a feeling it was going to be anything but simple. I moved with practiced efficiency around my small, self-contained domain. The unit, a marvel of contained computing power, felt like an extension of my own mind. On the main workbench, the victim's devices lay waiting. A sleek, high-end laptop, a couple of smartphones, a tablet, and a network-attached storage drive the usual arsenal of a tech mogul. Each piece of hardware was carefully bagged, labeled, and sealed, testament to the chain of custody. I picked up the laptop first, its cool metal casing a stark contrast to the grim reality it represented. "All right, Sterling," I murmured, more to myself than the inert machine. "Let's see what you were really up to." My first step was always forensic imaging. No one worked on original evidence. Ever, I connected the laptop to my right blocker, ensuring no data could be accidentally altered, then plugged it into my acquisition station. The software sprang to life, a cascade of green text against a black background, confirming the secure connection. I initiated a full disk image, watching the progress bar crawl, a digital hourglass measuring the extraction of a life's worth of data. While that hummed along, I moved onto the primary smartphone, repeating the process with a different set of tools designed for mobile operating systems. The official narrative delivered to me in curt, efficient sentences by the lead investigator was simple: a botched robbery. Sterling Vance alone in his sprawling smart home, surprised by intruders. A struggle, a fatal outcome. The physical scene, according to the brief, had supported this: overturned furniture, signs of forced entry, missing valuables. But I'd learned long ago that the physical world, while tangible, could be deceptively simple. The digital world, however, rarely lied. It just spoke in a language few bothered to learn. Hours bled into each other. The coffee in my mug grew cold, then was replaced by another steaming hot. My eyes, accustomed to the glow of multiple monitors, scanned lines of code, timestamps, and metadata. I started with network activity logs from the laptop. Cross-referencing them with the smart home's integrated system logs the digital heartbeat of Vance's residence. The timeline was crucial. The incident was officially clocked between 1:17 a.m. and 1:35 a.m. I focused on the minutes leading up to and immediately following that window. Usual patterns, automated system updates, a few late-night emails, some financial news feeds. Nothing out of the ordinary. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up communication logs. No outgoing calls or messages during the critical window. No incoming ones either, beyond a couple of spam texts. It all seemed to fit the narrative of a sudden, violent interruption. Then I found it. It wasn't a blaring siren or a flashing red warning. It was a whisper. A single, almost imperceptible entry in the laptop's file access logs. A file named Q4 Projections Final. DocX, located deep within a heavily nested financial directory, had been accessed. Not just accessed, but specifically opened and then closed. The timestamp, 1:29 a.m. I blinked, leaning closer to the screen, right in the middle of the supposed struggle. My brow furrowed. That didn't sit right. A high-profile executive, supposedly fighting for his life, would not be calmly opening a complex financial projection document. The official story painted a picture of chaos, of violence. Opening a Word document implied a deliberate, calm action. It implied focus. I pulled up the document itself. It was exactly what its name suggested. A detailed, multi-page analysis of the company's quarterly financial outlook. I scrolled through it quickly. No obvious edits, no frantic typos, nothing suggesting it had been interacted with under duress. It looked like any other professional document. Wait a minute, I mumbled, the words feeling heavy in the quiet unit. That doesn't add up. My first thought was a system error, a corrupt timestamp. It happened. My software, while robust, wasn't infallible, or maybe some background process had accessed it. An indexing service. I checked the process ID. No, it was clearly attributed to the primary user account, Sterling Vance's profile. And the access type was document open/close, not a background scan. I pulled up every other file access around that time. Nothing else. Just this one isolated interaction with Q4 projections final. DocX. It was like a single, perfectly still ripple in a pond otherwise thrashed by a storm. My fingers flew to cross-reference with the smart home logs again. Motion sensors in the study where the laptop was located showed activity consistent with a struggle around 1:20 a.m. A glass break sensor had triggered at 1:19 a.m. The main alarm system had been tripped at 1:18 a.m. Everything pointed to a violent intrusion. Yet this document had been opened calmly 9 minutes later. Perhaps he was trying to hide something, I mused, a flicker of doubt crossing my mind. Maybe he quickly accessed it in a desperate attempt to delete or secure something before the intruders got to him. But then why open it, not delete it? And why this document? It wasn't encrypted, it wasn't hidden. It was a standard business file. I zoomed in on the timestamp, scrutinizing every digit. 2024-10-2701-29:12 a.m. Precise. Unambiguous. No signs of corruption or manipulation on the raw file system level. It was exactly as recorded. If Sterling Vance was engaged in a life-or-death struggle, he wouldn't be opening a financial report. The official narrative, simple and clean, was starting to unravel. This wasn't a random anomaly. This was a deliberate digital action placed exactly where it shouldn't be. I leaned back in my chair, the server hum a low thrum against my ears. The air in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location felt suddenly heavier, charged with a different kind of tension. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This was something far more intricate, far more controlled. Someone had wanted that document opened, or at least to appear to have been opened at that precise moment. But why, and by whom? My gaze drifted back to the monitor, fixed on that single incongruous line of text. The Q4 projections final. DocX access at 1:29 a.m. It was the glitch in the matrix, the one thread that didn't fit. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that pulling on this thread would unravel everything. The investigation had just begun. My first thought, staring at that aberrant timestamp, was a system error. It happened. A manual action. Not a system demon, not an automated update. Someone using his credentials had accessed that secure folder after the time the medical examiner pegged as his demise. I leaned back in the ergonomic chair, the faint hum of the servers in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location, a steady counterpoint to the thrumming in my own skull. The unit was designed for isolation, for focus, for the kind of deep dive that required every ounce of concentration. Right now, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a pressure cooker. I double-checked the log entry, cross-referencing it with the system clock, the network sync, everything I could think of. The time was precise. The action was specific, a view operation on a folder marked proprietary research do not distribute. Not a file modification, just an access, but access by whom and when? I pulled up the secure communication channel, a direct line to the lead detective. His face, when it appeared on the screen, was a study in weary impatience. Bags under his eyes told a story of too many late nights and too many dead ends. User EO, he began without preamble. Anything concrete, we're looking to close this out. Robbery gone wrong, pure and simple. The street cameras caught a figure fleeing the scene, matching a known pattern. The victim's watch, a limited edition, was pawned less than an hour later. We have a suspect in custody. I held up a hand, a gesture he probably couldn't even see properly through the grainy feed. Detective, I have something. It doesn't fit the robbery gone wrong narrative. He sighed, a sound that vibrated through the speakers. Look, user EO, I appreciate the thoroughness. I really do. But sometimes a spade is just a spade. What's your anomaly? At 03:17 a.m., nearly 2 hours after the estimated time of death, Sterling Vance's primary user account accessed a highly secured folder on his personal server. A folder containing sensitive corporate data. A beat of silence, then a dry chuckle. User EO, come on, he's dead. You're telling me his ghost logged in for a peek at his sensitive corporate data. Maybe it was an automated backup or a network probe. Happens all the time. I've checked, I replied, my voice firm despite the rising frustration. It wasn't. It was a manual access attributed directly to his user ID. No automated process. No remote login from an external IP that I can see yet. It was as if he was sitting at his desk, typing in his password and opening that folder. Or, the detective countered, someone else was, someone who knew his password, someone who was already in the apartment, say, robbing him. They take the watch, they take his wallet, they see a computer, they try to log in, maybe they get lucky, poke around for anything else valuable, then they leave. It happens, people are greedy. But they didn't take anything from the computer, I argued. Just accessed a folder, no files copied, no data deleted, and then they pawned a watch that quickly, after taking the time to log into a secure system. Maybe they were interrupted, he answered, clearly wanting to end the conversation. Or they realized it was too much hassle. Look, user EO, I've got witnesses, physical evidence, a suspect who fits the profile. This ghost in the machine theory, while intriguing, doesn't change the fact that the man was bludgeoned during a home invasion. Stick to what you do best, clean up the digital mess, but let's not invent a new crime when we have an old one staring us in the face. He ended the call before I could respond, leaving me staring at a blank screen. My jaw tightened. Invent a new crime? I wasn't inventing anything. I was just reading the data, and the data was screaming. The unit felt smaller now, the air thicker. I knew the drill. The pressure to close cases, especially high-profile ones, was immense. A simple narrative was always preferred. It was clean, it was digestible, but clean and digestible rarely equated to truth. I closed my eyes for a moment, pushing away the image of the detective's dismissive face. Doubt, a familiar companion, tried to creep in. Was I overthinking this? Was it just a red herring, an odd log entry among millions? Was I seeing patterns where none existed? No. The precision of the timestamp, the nature of the folder, the timing relative to the estimated death. It was too specific, too deliberate. This wasn't background noise. This was a shout. All right, user EO, I muttered to myself, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Let's see how loud you can get. I pulled up my custom suite of tools, codenamed Deep Echo. It was designed to reconstruct fragmented data, to sift through the digital detritus that conventional forensics often overlooked. Deep Echo didn't just read logs. It analyzed the underlying system calls, the CPU cycles, the network packets that generated those logs. It looked for echoes of activity that might have been deliberately erased or obscured. The screens around me flickered, displaying cascades of hexadecimal code, network traffic graphs, and process trees. I started by focusing on the time window around the anomalous access. If someone had been logged in, even briefly, there would be other traces. Input device activity, memory allocations, cache writes. I initiated a full-spectrum analysis of the system's memory image, looking for residual data, fragments of processes that might have been active. This was a deep dive, a brute force approach that would take hours, but it was the only way to be sure. The fans in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location spun up a notch, a low, persistent drone. The air, already cool, seemed to get colder. Hours passed. The glow of the monitors painted my face in shifting hues of green and blue. I ignored the hunger pangs, the stiffness in my neck. This wasn't about a watch or a simple robbery anymore. This was about a deliberate act, a digital ghost. And then Deep Echo delivered. A series of fragmented network packets appeared on my primary screen, reconstructed from the system's volatile memory. They weren't part of any standard network communication. They were encrypted, small bursts of data, originating from within the local network, but outbound. And their destination wasn't an IP address. It was a secure peer-to-peer relay, designed to obscure the final endpoint, but the timing was everything. These packets were sent immediately after the secure folder was accessed, and more critically, they contained fragments of data. Not enough to reconstruct a full message, but enough to identify a pattern. A signature. It was a custom encryption algorithm I'd seen before, not in the wild, but in the specs of a very specific, highly secure corporate communication platform. A platform used by Sterling Vance's company, yes, but also by a select few other tech giants. A platform notorious for its end-to-end encryption and its ability to leave almost no trace. This wasn't just a log entry. This was an active communication, encrypted and routed, happening from inside the victim's system, right after a highly sensitive folder was accessed, and after he was supposed to be dead. The detective's robbery gone wrong narrative didn't just have a crack, it had a chasm. Someone hadn't just poked around. Someone had accessed critical information and then immediately broadcasted it using a highly sophisticated, untraceable method. My suspicion wasn't just solidified, it was carved in stone. This wasn't a robbery. This was something far more intricate, something far more dangerous. And the digital ghost I was chasing was leaving a trail only I seemed to be able to see. The hum of the servers in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location was a familiar lullaby, a constant thrum against the metallic shell of my workspace. Outside, the night was a thick, impenetrable blanket, swallowing any hint of distant city lights. Inside, it was a different kind of darkness, illuminated only by the cool blue glow of my monitors. I leaned forward, my reflection a pale, distorted ghost in the glass, as Deep Echo began its work. It wasn't just about parsing log files. Anyone with a decent script could do that. Deep Echo delved into the very fabric of the system, examining the minute fluctuations in CPU cycles, the spectral whispers of network packets, the ghost images of overwritten memory sectors. It was looking for the echoes, the faint resonance of activity that had been deliberately suppressed. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a nervous energy thrumming through me. The official narrative of a robbery gone wrong felt like a flimsy veil, and I was about to rip it away. The initial scan was a blur of hexadecimal streams and intricate network maps, scrolling too fast for the human eye to track. Deep Echo was building a baseline, mapping the known, legitimate activity of the victim's devices. Then came the filtering, the process of stripping away the noise, leaving only the anomalous. My eyes narrowed. A flicker on the secondary screen, a data cluster highlighted in an unusual shade of amber. It wasn't an error, not a corrupted file. It was something more insidious. A series of system calls, perfectly executed, mimicking routine background processes, but Deep Echo's heuristic algorithms flagged them. Too clean. I isolated the cluster. It pointed to a sequence of file access events on the victim's primary work drive. The timestamps were impeccable, nestled comfortably within periods of expected inactivity, late nights, early mornings, weekends. Standard maintenance, routine backups, automated updates. Nothing to raise an eyebrow for conventional analysis. But Deep Echo wasn't conventional. It wasn't just looking at when something happened, but how it happened. The CPU load during these routine events was marginally higher than expected for the stated processes. The network traffic, though minimal, showed a subtly different signature, a fractional deviation in packet size and timing that suggested an external rather than internal origin for the data transfer. It was like finding a single drop of salt water in a freshwater lake, perfectly blended but fundamentally alien. "Wait a minute," I murmured to myself, leaning closer, my breath fogging the screen slightly. My internal monologue was a flurry of questions. Could it be a faulty sensor, a one-off glitch in Deep Echo's parameters? I ran the cross-verification protocol, comparing the flagged data against billions of known legitimate system behaviors across a vast internal database. The amber glow persisted, unwavering. The patterns started to emerge. These subtle intrusions weren't random. They were recurring, like a phantom heartbeat in the machine. Every few days, sometimes every other day, a brief, surgical interaction with specific data directories. Not deletion, not overt modification. More like a reading, a quiet exfiltration. And always the digital forensics equivalent of wiping down the fingerprints, a series of cascading system calls designed to make the activity appear as an integral part of the operating system's own self-management. This wasn't some amateur hacker trying to cover their tracks. This was precise. This was sophisticated. I zoomed in on one of the network signatures. The IP address trail was a masterpiece of misdirection, bouncing through several compromised servers, anonymized proxies, and then vanishing into a deep web labyrinth. A dead end for anyone without the resources to untangle a digital Gordian knot. But Deep Echo had a knack for finding the thread. It wasn't the destination that mattered right now, it was the signature of the journey. The way the packets were constructed, the specific, almost archaic encryption protocols layered beneath standard TLS. It was a fingerprint, distinct and complex. My initial thought, a flicker of doubt, was that I was seeing things, chasing ghosts in the machine where none existed. The human mind was wired for pattern recognition, sometimes to its detriment. I reran the analysis, pushing deep echo to its limits, demanding a statistical validation of the anomalies. The results came back with a confidence interval that made my scalp prickle. This wasn't an illusion. This was real. The ghost wasn't just a single anomaly. It was a methodical, almost artistic manipulation of the victim's digital life. Someone had been meticulously monitoring, extracting, and then erasing their own traces, making it look like the system itself was simply doing its job. The kind of person who understood the deep architecture of operating systems, who knew how to weave their presence into the background noise, rendering themselves invisible to all but the most specialized tools. My tools, this shifted everything. The idea of a panicked burglar stumbling upon sensitive data and then haphazardly trying to delete it was laughable. This was calculated. This was professional. This wasn't about a simple robbery gone wrong. It was about something far more intricate, far more sinister. The official suspects, the petty criminals rounded up on street cameras near the crime scene, were just noise, distractions. The killer hadn't just left no physical trace. They had actively engineered their digital absence, leaving behind a mirage of normalcy. And in doing so, they had painted a target on the back of anyone who dared to look too closely, which I realized with a jolt was me. The digital ghost was real, and it was watching. Inside, it was a different kind of darkness, the kind that settled in the corners of my mind when I knew something was profoundly wrong, but couldn't quite put my finger on what. I'd spent the last 48 hours sifting through the digital detritus of the first victim, a tech mogul named Redacted by User for Story Premise, his life meticulously cataloged in gigabytes of data. My initial findings had been unsettling. The official report declared a robbery gone wrong, a tragic but simple explanation for a brutal end. But the digital breadcrumbs I'd uncovered told a different story. Small, almost invisible anomalies, a peculiar pattern in network traffic logs hours before the incident, an unusual encryption method used for a seemingly innocuous personal memo, a phantom login attempt from an IP address that bounced through half a dozen obscure global proxies before vanishing. Each anomaly, on its own, could be dismissed as a fluke, a digital ghost in the machine. But together they whispered of something far more deliberate, far more sinister. I'd flagged them, of course, presented my findings to the detective. He'd listened, nodded, but I could tell he was anchored to the simpler narrative, the one that made sense to the public. He'd seen too many open and shut cases. I, on the other hand, had seen too many ghosts. I was hunched over my primary workstation, a triple monitor setup glowing with lines of code and hexadecimal strings, tracing the last known activity of a proprietary communication app the victim had used. It was a dead end, or so it seemed, but I had a stubborn streak a mile wide. The app was designed for high-security, peer-to-peer messaging, theoretically untraceable. Yet, there was that tiny flicker, that almost imperceptible data burst that didn't quite fit the app's established protocol. It was like finding a single, perfectly round pebble on a beach full of jagged stones. My gut clenched. Then my secure comms device buzzed, startling me. The display showed the detective's contact ID. My fingers hesitated before I answered. It was late, even for him. User EO, his voice crackled, tight with an edge I hadn't heard before. "We have another one." My breath hitched. The air in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location suddenly felt thin. "Another what?" I asked, though I already knew. My stomach dropped like a lead weight. "Another death, high profile, redacted by user for story premises senior VP of R&D, a woman named redacted by user for story premise. He was found this evening in her home, looks like. Another accident, or maybe a home invasion, same kind of mess." He paused, and I could hear the weariness in his sigh. "But I can't shake it. Something feels wrong. Too neat, too. Her digital devices." I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Already bagged. The field team is en route to my location. Should be there in an hour. We need I to go over everything, user EO, with a fine-tooth comb. Don't hold back. I want to know if there's a connection, anything." "There will be," I murmured, more to myself than to him. It wasn't just a ghost anymore. It was a pattern. My earlier doubts about my own conclusions evaporated, replaced by a surge of grim determination. I hadn't been chasing phantoms. Someone was orchestrating these accidents, these robberies gone wrong, and they were using the digital realm as their weapon and their shield. True to his word, an hour later, a plain black sedan pulled up outside the unit. Two uniformed officers carried in several evidence bags, each containing a tablet, a laptop, and a couple of smartphones. I set them up on my clean bench, donning fresh gloves, the sterile scent of the latex a stark contrast to the grim task ahead. I started with the laptop, imaging the drive first, a meticulous process of replication that ensured no data was altered. As the progress bar crawled across the screen, I moved to the smartphone, bypassing its lock screen with a specialized forensic tool. The screen flickered to life, a gallery of smiling faces, mundane apps, and the last fragments of a vibrant existence. I began to extract call logs, messages, browser history, network connections. I found the usual suspects: work emails, social media, online banking. But then there it was, a flicker, a small encrypted file hidden deep within a system directory, masquerading as a corrupted font file. It was the same type of encryption, the same unusual header, the same peculiar file size I'd seen on the first victim's device. Not identical in content, no, but the signature was unmistakable, like finding two distinct fingerprints left by the same unique glove. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My mind raced, putting the pieces together. This wasn't a random anomaly. This was a digital breadcrumb left by design. It was a unique, subtle marker, sophisticated enough to be overlooked by anyone not specifically looking for it and easily dismissed as a system glitch. But I had been looking. I had felt the unease, the prickle of wrongness. My initial theory, dismissed by others, now stood undeniable. This wasn't an accident. This was targeted. And the killer was using digital means not just to plan, but to leave a specific, almost taunting signature. A ghost in the machine indeed, but one with intent. The implications hit me hard. Two high-profile individuals from the same tech company, two deaths both initially explained away, and now a digital thread connecting them, woven so subtly into the fabric of their devices that it almost screamed coincidence. Almost. I stared at the glowing lines of code on my screen, the evidence staring back at me. I had proof. But what kind of proof was this? A digital whisper in a world shouting physical violence. My breath hitched again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from a newfound resolve. And I, user EO, was the only one who saw their digital handiwork. The game had just escalated, and I was now standing squarely in its crosshairs. The hum of the servers in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location was the only sound for a long moment after I'd ended the call. Oppressive, I'd called it. Now it felt like a bass note, a deep, resonant thrum of confirmation. A pattern. Two victims, digitally scrubbed clean, the same phantom touch leaving the same phantom void. This wasn't a hallucination, this was an orchestration. I leaned back in my chair, stretching the stiffness from my shoulders. My eyes, gritty from staring at lines of code and hex dumps, scanned the triple monitors. On the left, the reconstructed fragments from the first victim's drive. In the center, the second victim's more recent, more aggressively wiped data. On the right, a blank canvas waiting for connections. "All right, user EO," I muttered to myself, the sound of my own voice a jarring intrusion in the quiet. "Let's see what you really wanted to hide." I started with the second victim. The killer had been more confident, or perhaps more rushed this time. The deletion methods were similar, but there was a subtle shift in the timestamp manipulation. A fraction of a second off, consistent across multiple files. Not enough to flag an automated script as faulty, but enough to make me a human pause, a signature, a digital stutter. I pulled up the metadata logs from both machines, overlaying them. It was like trying to find a specific grain of sand on two different beaches. The initial sweep had yielded nothing, but now, with the knowledge of a deliberate pattern, I wasn't looking for what was there, but what wasn't. The first victim, a software architect, had been working on something called Project Chimera. It was a highly encrypted, proprietary framework, according to the scraps I'd managed to piece together. I had dismissed it initially as just another corporate secret, unrelated to the murder. But the second victim, a systems engineer, had no obvious connection to the architect's specific team or company, or so I thought. I focused on the timeframes before the deletions. What files had been accessed, modified, or even looked at by both victims in the days leading up to their demise. This was the true needle in the digital haystack. The killer wasn't just deleting. They were targeting specific information. Hours blurred. The faint scent of stale coffee and ozone filled the mobile forensic unit at a remote location. I ignored the hunger pangs, the stiff neck, the burning in my eyes. This was a race, and I was the only one on the track. Then a flicker. A recurring string of characters in a series of obscure log files on the second victim's machine. Not a file name, not a directory, more like an identifier. CR7. It appeared in association with network activity, encrypted communications, and then invariably a deletion event shortly after. I cross-referenced CR7 with the first victim's recovered data. Nothing immediately obvious. My brow furrowed. Wait, that doesn't add up. If this was a shared project, why wasn't the identifier present on the first victim's system in the same way? Had the killer been more thorough there? Or was I barking up the wrong digital tree? Had I overinterpreted the pattern? Was I seeing connections where there were none simply because I wanted to? The determination, which had felt so solid moments ago, wavered. Perhaps the similarities were coincidental, a common toolkit used by two unrelated criminals. No, that was too easy, too neat. And the timing, the precision of the deletions. I pushed the doubt aside with a grunt. I had to assume the pattern was real. If CR7 wasn't directly present on the first victim's machine, what was its equivalent? Or more importantly, what was it referring to? I started a deeper search on the first victim system, not for CR7 directly, but for keywords associated with the context in which CR7 appeared on the second victim's machine. Secure protocols, specific encryption libraries, distributed ledger technologies. Bingo. Not CR7, but Cassandra R7. A slightly different naming convention, but the underlying project references were identical. It was buried deep within an archived project folder marked as Legacy but with recent access dates. The architect had been the lead on Cassandra R7. The systems engineer had been tasked with a critical component of CR7 network integration. Two sides of the same coin. My breath hitched. Cassandra R7. Cassandra, the prophetess cursed to utter true prophecies but never to be believed. The files associated with Cassandra R7 on both systems showed a distinct pattern of access. Regular, often late night, followed by a flurry of encrypted communications, then a period of inactivity, and finally the deletion event. The killer wasn't just erasing files, they were erasing the evidence of interaction with those files. They wanted to sever the connection, to make it appear as if Cassandra R7 never existed, or at least wasn't important enough to be related to the victims. But why? What was so dangerous about Cassandra R7? And who would have the motive and the skill to orchestrate such a sophisticated digital cleanup operation across different companies and individuals? I started sketching out a profile in my head, a digital ghost emerging from the patterns of erasure. This wasn't a random hacker. This was someone with intimate knowledge of both victims' professional lives, their projects, their digital habits. Someone who understood advanced digital forensics enough to anticipate my methods, or at least to try and thwart them. The killer was meticulous, patient, and highly skilled in network security and data obfuscation. The slight timestamp discrepancy, the varied naming conventions for the same project, these weren't mistakes. They were deliberate attempts to throw off an analyst to make the pattern appear less cohesive. A digital fingerprint, smudged just enough to make identification difficult but still present. This person wasn't just a murderer, they were a digital architect of deception. And Cassandra R7 was the key. Whatever it was important enough to kill for and important enough to meticulously erase every digital trace. The stakes had just escalated dramatically, and I was sitting in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location, holding the thread that could unravel everything. I picked up my secure satellite phone, my thumb hovering over the detective's contact. I think I found something, I'd tell them. Something they both worked on, something they both died for. But before I made that call, I needed to dig deeper into Cassandra R7. What exactly was it? The hum of the servers in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location was a constant, low thrum against the thick silence. It had become my personal white noise, a mechanical heartbeat accompanying my dive into the second victim's digital afterlife. The timestamp anomaly I'd spotted earlier, that fractional second offset, was a persistent itch I couldn't ignore. It was too precise to be random, too subtle to be accidental. It was a signature, I was convinced, just a very quiet one. I spent hours, then days, dissecting the victim's network traffic logs, meticulously reconstructing every packet, every connection. The first victim's deletion methods had been crude, effective for a quick cover-up, but amateurish by my standards. The second victim, that was different. The killer had evolved, or perhaps revealed a fraction more of their true capabilities. The timestamps weren't just off, they were consistently off, indicating a script, yes, but one that anticipated scrutiny. It was like watching a master illusionist performing a sleight of hand. The trick wasn't in the disappearance, but in the precision of the misdirection. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion as I navigated through layers of proxy logs and encrypted communication fragments. I was trying to trace the point of origin for the deletion script, hoping to find a breadcrumb that wasn't scrubbed. I hit a wall, a digital barrier I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't a standard corporate firewall, the kind designed to keep out opportunistic script kiddies. This was a dynamic defense adapting to my probes in real time. Each port scan was met with a different response, each packet injection attempt rerouted into a black hole of dummy data. It was like trying to punch smoke. "Well, hello there," I muttered, leaning closer to the screen, my breath fogging the cool glass. This wasn't the work of a panicked amateur. This was professional grade, perhaps even state-sponsored. My initial assessment, that the killer was clever but not necessarily a top-tier digital ghost, wavered. I pushed harder, deploying a custom-built packet sniffer designed to map out the network topology even through obfuscated routes. The firewall, rather than blocking me outright, began to mirror my attempts, creating phantom access points, a digital hall of mirrors. It was a beautiful, terrifying piece of code. I spent another 12 hours wrestling with it, my eyes gritty, my coffee long cold. I finally breached a segment, not through brute force, but by exploiting a subtle timing vulnerability in its adaptive algorithm. I slid past, a ghost myself, into what I hoped was the inner sanctum. What I found there wasn't just encrypted data. It was layered encryption. Multiple algorithms chained together, some of them proprietary, others open source but implemented with such complexity that they defied standard decryption methods. It was like finding a safe within a safe, each with a different obscure locking mechanism. This wasn't about hiding a few emails. This was about burying an entire digital life, making it utterly unreadable without a specific, likely custom-built key. "Okay," I said, the word a rasp in my throat. "This doesn't add up. A simple robbery gone wrong? No. A high-profile murder, dismissed as such, where the perpetrator then goes to this extreme to erase digital tracks. It screamed conspiracy, a deliberate attempt to keep eyes away from whatever secrets lay beneath these digital layers. This wasn't just covering tracks. This was building an impenetrable vault over them. The sheer effort, the expertise required was staggering. Just as I began to formulate a new decryption strategy, a series of urgent alerts flashed across my secondary monitor. Red banners, usually reserved for critical system failures, pulsed with an alarming regularity. My internal network, the secure, isolated environment of the mobile forensic unit, was under attack. Not literally, of course, but the sudden jolt was visceral. This wasn't some random opportunistic probe. This was targeted, precise. Someone was trying to get into my system. Someone knew I was here, knew what I was doing, and was actively fighting back. I watched, paralyzed for a split second as the intrusion attempts escalated. They weren't trying to compromise my firewall. They were trying to bypass it, aiming directly for my secure shell, for the very data I was trying to protect. My system logs scrolled by at an impossible speed, showing a cascade of login attempts, privilege escalation probes, and what looked like a custom-designed rootkit trying to establish a backdoor. I slammed my fist on the desk, the dull thud echoing in the quiet unit. "I think I can just waltz in?" My fingers flew again, but this time it was defensive. I activated my countermeasures, a series of honeypots and reverse trace protocols designed to ensnare and identify aggressors. I watched the attack vectors shift, the origin IP addresses jumping through a dizzying array of proxy chains. But I saw it, a flicker, a fleeting, almost imperceptible detail in the packet headers. It was the timestamp, a fractional second offset consistent across multiple packets originating from the intrusion attempt. The same subtle, precise anomaly I'd found in the second victim's deleted files. It was the killer's digital fingerprint right there, bold as brass. They weren't just aware, they were taunting me. They were telling me without a shadow of a doubt that they knew I was on their trail, and they were willing to come for me. A grim smile touched my lips. This changed everything. I wasn't just an investigator anymore, I was a target, and that made this personal. The thought of backing down, of letting the official narrative stand, vanished. There was no more self-doubt, just a renewed, burning resolve. They wanted a fight. They were going to get one. I had underestimated them, yes, but they had underestimated me even more. I wouldn't just decrypt their secrets. I'd dismantle their entire digital empire, one meticulously crafted lie at a time. The game had officially begun. My fingers flew again, but this time it was defensive. But I wasn't just watching. I was baiting, luring the digital predator deeper into a web of my own making. The screen in front of me, a custom-built array of high-resolution monitors, glowed with a frantic dance of data packets and IP addresses, each one a fleeting ghost. The mobile forensic unit at a remote location hummed around me, a low, steady thrum of servers and cooling fans that was the only constant companion in my solitude. Outside, the night was thick, impenetrable, a perfect cloak for the digital war I was waging within these reinforced walls. The air, recycled and filtered, carried the faint, metallic scent of ozone, a byproduct of the sheer processing power churning through the dark. I leaned closer, my posture hunched, my eyes, usually shielded by blue light filtering glasses, now raw and bloodshot from hours of intense focus. This wasn't a random probing. This was a targeted, aggressive attempt to not just shut me down, but to erase any trace of what I had found. They were trying to sterilize the digital battlefield, but every attempt to erase left a faint, almost imperceptible echo. I wasn't looking for the attack itself anymore. I was looking for the signature within the attack, like a unique brushstroke in a forged painting. The proxies were sophisticated, layered like an onion, each peel revealing another, seemingly unrelated server farm or compromised network. Eastern European, then South American, then bouncing through a series of compromised EOT devices in Southeast Asia. A global game of digital hopscotch, but something was off. The transitions, while fast, had a peculiar rhythm, a slight, almost imperceptible delay between certain jumps. Not enough to be a vulnerability, but enough to be a characteristic. Wait, I mumbled to myself, my voice raspy, my brow furrowed, that particular rhythmic stutter. It wasn't about speed, it was about control. Most attackers prioritize raw speed and obfuscation. This felt deliberate, like they weren't just hiding, they were managing the flow, perhaps to avoid tripping certain automated defenses or to ensure a specific type of data packet could traverse the network without corruption. It didn't add up. Why slow down even fractionally when my goal is to be invisible and fast? Unless the goal wasn't just invisibility. I pulled back from the direct trace. It was a dead end, a bottomless pit designed to waste my time. Instead, I shifted my focus to the type of packets being sent. The attack wasn't just a brute force denial of service. There were subtle data exfiltration attempts woven into the noise, like a thief whistling innocently while picking a pocket. They weren't just trying to stop me. They were trying to take something, but what? I initiated a new protocol, a digital dragnet designed to sift through the noise and identify any unique metadata tags or proprietary encryption algorithms embedded within the attacking packets. It was a long shot, like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. But if that grain of sand had a distinct crystalline structure, I might just find it. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The hum of the servers intensified, the screens flickering with incomprehensible data. My own heartbeat felt like a drum against my ribs. I doubted myself just for a moment. Was I chasing ghosts? Had the exhaustion finally made me see patterns where there were none? Maybe it was just a highly skilled lone wolf, capable of such intricate obfuscation. Maybe I was overthinking it, looking for grand conspiracy when it was just a simple, albeit sophisticated, digital hit. But then, a flicker. Not an IP address, not a server location. It was a tiny, embedded snippet of code. An obscure, custom-built header on a series of data packets that had attempted to query my internal file structure. It was so small, so expertly camouflaged that it had slipped past my initial filters, blending into the static. But my new dragnet, designed to look for anything out of the ordinary in the structure of the data, had snagged it. I isolated the snippet. It was a form of proprietary error correction, a unique digital fingerprint, and I recognized it, not from public databases, not from standard corporate software. I'd seen something similar years ago, buried deep within a leaked document from a highly secretive corporate security firm. A firm known for its aggressive tactics, its deep ties to powerful tech conglomerates, and its penchant for operating in the shadows, often on the fringes of legality. The name flashed in my mind, Omnicorp Solutions. Not a household name, but whispered in certain circles as the ultimate fixer, the digital muscle for the ultra-rich and politically connected. My breath hitched. This wasn't the killer. This was something far larger. Omnicorp Solutions didn't do petty crime. They didn't engage in random acts of digital vandalism. If they were involved, it meant the initial murder wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a carefully orchestrated elimination, and the digital attack on me was a systematic effort to bury the truth, not just from the public, but from anyone who dared to dig too deep. The killer was merely a proxy, a tool. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The victim, the initial data I'd uncovered, the deepfakes, it all clicked into place. This wasn't about who pulled the trigger, but who orchestrated the entire symphony of deception. And Omnicorp Solutions was the conductor. The stakes had just rocketed past mere corporate espionage into something far more dangerous. They weren't just trying to hide a murder. They were trying to protect an entire web of corporate or political objectives, and I was now a direct threat to their entire operation. I leaned back, the chair groaning under my sudden shift. My eyes scanned the glowing screens, no longer just a chaotic mess of data, but a blueprint of a vast, interconnected conspiracy. The low hum of the mobile forensic unit at a remote location suddenly felt less like a protective cocoon and more like a beacon, broadcasting my location to an enemy I now knew had virtually limitless resources. I had unmasked the proxy, all right. But in doing so, I just painted a very large target on my own back. But I was faster, or at least my digital tripwires were. The attack vectors, jumping through a dizzying array of proxy chains, slammed into my honeypots, a digital wall of mirrors and false flags designed to reflect and confuse. My screens, already a chaotic symphony of data streams, flared with new alerts. Green, then amber, never quite red, thank the digital gods. I watched, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to reinforce any weak points. I was in the belly of the beast, or rather the heart of my sanctuary, the mobile forensic unit at a remote location. The hum of the server racks was a familiar lullaby, the glow of the monitors a constant companion. Outside, the world was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the silent war raging across fiber optic cables. I'd chosen this unit for its isolation, its hardened defenses, and its direct, secure connection to the few nodes I trusted. The aggressor wasn't just probing, they were actively trying to penetrate. It was like a digital battering ram, relentless, sophisticated. Most hackers, when met with resistance, would retreat, perhaps try a different angle. Not this one. This was a direct, focused assault, almost personal. That's when it clicked. A specific signature, a unique byte pattern in the attack payload caught my eye. It was subtle, almost imperceptible amidst the noise, but it resonated with something I'd seen before. Not in a criminal database, not in any public vulnerability report. It was a variation, a refinement of a technique I'd developed years ago, a bespoke encryption method I'd shelved because it was too aggressive, too untraceable, too me. My breath hitched. This wasn't just some anonymous killer trying to cover their tracks. This was someone who knew my work, someone who had studied me. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a cold dread seeping into my bones. The official narrative of a robbery gone wrong wasn't just flawed, it was a grotesque misdirection. The victim wasn't just collateral damage, they were a target, and now I was too. The killer wasn't just a ghost leaving no physical trace. They were a digital predator hunting specific individuals, and they had just found their next prey. Wait, I muttered to the empty unit, my voice hoarse. That doesn't add up. If they wanted me gone, why not just disappear? Why spend so much effort trying to breach my defenses, trying to get in? Unless they didn't just want me gone, they wanted something from me. Or worse, they wanted to frame me to turn my own digital tools against me. A flicker of doubt, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through my resolve. Had I been too arrogant, too confident in my own digital fortress? This wasn't just a game of hide and seek anymore. This was a duel, and my opponent was using my own moves against me. I pulled back from the immediate defense, letting my automated systems manage the ongoing probes. My mind raced, sifting through every interaction, every anomaly I'd uncovered since starting this case. The victim's encrypted drives, the deepfake residue, the corporate secrets. No, trap. They weren't just trying to break in, they were trying to lure me out, or at least lure a response that would reveal my true location or identity. They wanted me to overreact, to make a mistake. If they could replicate my own techniques, they understood my mindset. They knew I wouldn't back down. If they wanted to play that game, I knew a few tricks of my own. I wasn't going to just defend. I was going to turn the hunter into the hunted. My fingers, previously poised for defense, now danced across the keyboard with renewed purpose. The killer's modus operandi wasn't just about digital murder. It was about psychological manipulation, about exploiting vulnerabilities, both human and systemic. They used deepfakes to create confusion, encrypted data to create dead ends, and now, direct digital assault to provoke. I had to use their own methods against them. I began to craft my own bait, a digital breadcrumb trail so enticing, so irresistible, that the killer wouldn't be able to ignore it. It had to be something that resonated with their motive, something that suggested a breakthrough, a critical piece of information I'd supposedly stumbled upon. I decided to create a phantom server, a meticulously constructed digital illusion, appearing to hold a decrypted fragment of the victim's deepest secret, not the full secret, just enough to make them believe I was on the verge of uncovering everything. I began by isolating a small, seemingly innocuous data cluster from the victim's most heavily encrypted drives, a series of time-stamped log files that, to an untrained eye, meant nothing. But to someone who knew the victim's habits, or the killer's methods, they would hint at a critical window of vulnerability. I meticulously aged the digital fingerprints on the decrypted files, making it seem like I'd been working on them for days. slowly piecing together the puzzle. I layered in subtle anomalies, just enough to suggest a hurried, perhaps reckless, discovery on my part. The goal wasn't just to attract attention, it was to provoke a specific, identifying response. I built a series of secondary honeypots around this phantom server, each one designed to capture a unique digital signature, an IP address, a specific access pattern, anything that could tie back to a real-world location or identity. The hardest part was making it look authentic, like a genuine breakthrough without actually giving away any real information. It was a delicate dance, a tightrope walk between revelation and strategic withholding. I spent hours lost in the intricate architecture of the trap, my mind buzzing with possibilities and pitfalls. Every line of code, every simulated vulnerability was a calculated risk. Finally, I leaned back, my eyes scanning the network topology I'd created. The phantom server sat like a juicy fly in a meticulously spun web. The hum of the servers was no longer a lullaby, but a ticking clock. I watched the network traffic, a digital angler waiting for a bite. Minutes crawled by, feeling like hours. Then, a subtle blip. An unusual connection request, bouncing through a series of unfamiliar proxies, started probing the perimeter of my newly deployed bait. It was tentative, cautious, but it was there. The killer had taken the bait. The game was on. My screens, already a chaotic symphony of data streams, flared with an aggressive, crimson warning. Not a system error, but a digital shriek. The attack vectors, jumping through a dizzying array of proxy chains, had slammed into my honeypots a digital wall of mirrors and false flags designed to reflect and confuse. I was faster, or at least my tripwires were. The mobile forensic unit at a remote location hummed around me, a cocoon of servers and blinking lights in the otherwise silent wilderness. The only sound was the whir of cooling fans, the occasional clack of my keyboard, and the frantic thrum of my own pulse. The air conditioner struggled against the heat generated by the racks, creating a faint metallic tang that always accompanied my deep dives. I leaned forward, my face inches from the central monitor, the glow reflecting in my eyes. This wasn't just a probe, it was a full frontal assault, a digital battering ram trying to smash through my carefully constructed defenses. "You really want to play?" I muttered, my voice raspy. The attacker wasn't just trying to mask their identity. They were trying to gain access, to turn my own tools against me. A surge of data, disguised as innocuous network traffic, tried to piggyback on my outbound connection. I saw the signature, a sophisticated remote access Trojan designed not just for data exfiltration, but for system takeover. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of practiced motion. A new firewall rule spun up, an immediate quarantine, isolating the hostile payload in a sandboxed environment. The digital wall held, but the pressure was immense. I wasn't just defending, I was hunting. This wasn't just a response to my probing, it was a direct counterattack, an admission that I was close. Too close. My goal wasn't just to repel them, but to use their aggression against them, to trace their digital breadcrumbs back to the source, and to retrieve the crucial, incriminating data I knew they were trying to protect or destroy. The attacker shifted tactics, abandoning the direct infiltration attempt. Now they were on the defensive, or so it seemed. I watched as data streams from the victim's cloud storage began to fragment, then dissolve. A targeted data wipe. This was it. The real prize was still out there, hidden in the layers of redundant backups and dark archives the victim had maintained. I had glimpsed a unique encryption signature on a seemingly innocuous file during my initial scan, something that didn't fit the victim's usual profile. It was my best lead. My fingers danced, chasing the data as it tried to evaporate. I initiated a cascade of retrieval protocols, flooding the network with requests, creating a digital dragnet. It was a race against time, against a digital ghost intent on erasing every trace. The attacker wasn't just wiping. They were actively corrupting, injecting junk data to make recovery impossible. A flash on a secondary screen caught my eye. A hidden partition, previously locked down tight, briefly flickered open as the attacker's frantic deletion process momentarily destabilized the system's integrity. It was a fraction of a second, an oversight born of haste. My brain registered the anomaly before I even consciously processed it. Wait, that doesn't add up. The deletion scripts were elegant, almost surgical, yet this brief exposure was clumsy. A misdirection? Or a genuine mistake? I didn't hesitate. I launched a specialized data grab, bypassing the deletion routine and targeting the exposed partition. The network groaned under the strain. My own system's fans ramped up to a shriek, the mobile unit vibrating faintly beneath my feet. Sweat beaded on my forehead, stinging my eyes, but I didn't dare look away. The progress bar crawled, agonizingly slow. The attacker was fighting back, actively trying to sever my connection to corrupt the data stream mid-transfer. Each percentage point felt like a victory, a hard-won inch in a digital tug-of-war. My internal monologue was a rapid-fire stream of commands, probabilities, and tactical adjustments. Push harder, bypass the integrity checks, prioritize raw data, filter later. Then, a breakthrough, the transfer completed, just as the hidden partition vanished again, swallowed by the attacker's relentless wipe. I had it, or at least a significant chunk of it. I quickly isolated the newly acquired data, running a rapid decryption scan. The file structure was convoluted, a deliberate maze. But then it opened. My breath hitched. It wasn't just a log file. It was a meticulously detailed communication log, time-stamped and encrypted with that unique signature I'd seen before. The sender was an account labeled Overseer Alpha, an identity I had never encountered in any public or private database connected to the victim. The content? Specific instructions to the victim, outlining a sophisticated data manipulation scheme, not just deleting, but fabricating evidence, creating deepfake financial records, and planting misleading digital footprints. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a professional hit, executed with surgical precision and covered by a digital smokescreen. The most chilling part, the true reveal, was the encryption signature itself. It wasn't standard. It wasn't open source. This wasn't just a lone wolf hacker. This was a well-funded, highly organized operation, and the victim was either complicit or a pawn caught in a web far more intricate than I had imagined. My victory was short-lived. A new alert flashed, more insidious than the last. While I was focused on the data retrieval, the attacker had launched a secondary, more subtle probe. Not at my firewall, but at the power grid of the mobile forensic unit itself. A power fluctuation. They weren't trying to delete my data. They were trying to shut me down physically. The hum of the servers faltered, then surged. The lights flickered. I had the data, a crucial piece of the puzzle, but the game had just escalated. I was no longer just a digital ghost hunter. I was now the hunted, and the ghost was reaching beyond the screen into the very real world. The hum of the servers in the mobile forensic unit at a remote location was the only sound, a constant, low thrumming that felt like the heartbeat of my isolated world. My fingers, still tingling from the adrenaline of the data transfer, danced across the keyboard. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. I leaned forward, my gaze fixed on the primary monitor, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. The hidden partition, that digital phantom, had been wiped mere seconds after I'd managed to snatch its contents. Now the real work began, decryption. The file structure was indeed convoluted, a labyrinth of nested directories and obfuscated file names, each designed to misdirect, to hide. It was a digital dead-end sign meant to deter anyone but the most persistent. Good thing persistence was my middle name. I ran a rapid decryption scan, my custom algorithms tearing through layers of encryption faster than anything off the shelf could manage. The process was agonizingly slow, each percentage point feeling like an eternity. I chewed on the inside of my cheek, the metallic taste a counterpoint to the dry air. The faint light of dawn filtered through the unit's small, reinforced window, painting the control panel in shades of gray and pale orange. I hadn't moved, barely blinked. My eyes burned, but I couldn't look away. Then a chime, a soft, victorious sound from the speakers, decryption complete. My breath hitched. The file tree blossomed on the screen, a sprawling network of documents, logs, and multimedia files. I started with the largest files, usually the most significant. One particularly massive archive caught my eye. Its file name was innocuous enough, Project Phoenix Specs. Zip, Phoenix, a rebirth, a rising from ashes. My gut clenched. I opened it. The contents were a mosaic of corporate strategy documents, financial projections, and startlingly, a series of encrypted communication logs. But it was the subfolder labeled Directive Alpha that made my blood run cold. Inside, I found high-resolution deepfake video renders, not of random faces, but of the murder victim, the initial robbery suspect, and several key witnesses. They were performing actions, saying things that never happened, creating alibis and scapegoats with chilling precision. This wasn't just about a robbery. This was a meticulously crafted narrative designed to control public perception and derail any genuine investigation. Then I found it. A deeply buried, heavily fragmented document, almost entirely overwritten, but enough remained for my tools to reconstruct. It wasn't a technical document. It was a journal. It detailed a grand vision for a technological future. one where certain undesirables and obstacles were systematically removed, their companies absorbed, their innovations repurposed for a singular overarching goal. The author wasn't just a corporate raider. They were an ideologue, a digital architect of destiny. The name attached to the journal, revealed only after an additional layer of biometric-based encryption was finally broken, hit me like a physical blow. It was the acquiring corporate executive. The very individual who had, in the wake of the initial murder, swooped in to consolidate the victim's assets, lauded as a visionary saving a struggling company. The public saw a hero. I was looking at a monster. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The deepfakes, the meticulously planned robbery, the swift corporate takeover, the way every digital breadcrumb had been erased, it all clicked into place. The executive hadn't just benefited from the victim's death. They had orchestrated it, along with a series of other unfortunate incidents that had paved their path to unparalleled power within the tech sector. It was a terrifying form of digital Darwinism. I stared at the name, at the manifesto of their twisted vision. Could I really be looking at the architect of such an intricate, brutal scheme? It felt too grand, too audacious, too perfectly executed to be true. My stomach churned with a nauseous mixture of fear and disbelief. The executive was untouchable, revered. My evidence was digital, easily dismissed as fabrication by someone with their resources. I felt a surge of doubt. What if I was wrong? What if this was another layer of misdirection, designed to frame them? But the sheer volume of corroborating data, the deepfake source files, the financial transfers disguised as legitimate acquisitions, the detailed plans for corporate restructuring, before the victim's death, it was all there, undeniable. This wasn't just about solving a murder anymore. This was about exposing a systemic predator operating in plain sight, pulling strings from the highest echelons of power. And I, a reclusive analyst in a box truck, was the only one who saw it. The weight of that knowledge was crushing. I knew what I had to do. This couldn't be handed over to just any authority. It would be buried, spun, or worse, I'd become another unfortunate incident. No, this had to be public. It had to hit with the force of an asteroid. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a renewed sense of purpose overriding the lingering doubt. I began to compile. The deepfakes, the journal entries, the financial records, the communication logs, I encrypted them, time-stamped them, and packaged them into an unalterable, self-executing archive. Then I prepared a secure, untraceable broadcast. I wasn't going to leak it. I was going to stream it live with a pre-recorded, synthesized voiceover explaining every damning detail, every intricate deception. The target audience, every major news outlet, every digital watchdog group, every citizen with an internet connection. The clock on my screen ticked past 4 a.m. The world was still mostly asleep, unaware that its carefully constructed reality was about to shatter. I linked into a secure distributed network, routing my signal through a dozen different countries, bouncing it off satellite arrays, ensuring its origin was untraceable. Initiating broadcast in T-minus 60 seconds, my internal timer announced. This was it. The point of no return. I was throwing a digital grenade into the carefully manicured garden of the tech elite. The executive would know. They would know it was me. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce resolve. 50 seconds. I took a deep, shaky breath, the recycled air tasting metallic. 30 seconds. I checked the broadcast parameters one last time. Everything was locked down, airtight. 10, 9, 8. The cursor blinked, waiting for my final command. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I hit enter. A flood of data surged from my mobile forensic unit at a remote location out into the digital ether. A digital ghost finally manifesting, carrying the truth. On the screen, the broadcast status changed from pending to live. The first deepfake video clip showing the victim confessing to financial fraud began to play, followed by my synthesized voice calmly dissecting every frame, every pixel, revealing the meticulous deception. The confrontation wasn't physical, not yet. But as I watched the data stream spike, as the first news alerts flashed across the bottom of the screen, I knew the executive was waking up. They were seeing it. And their digital ghost, the one that left no physical trace, was finally being hunted. I was no longer just an analyst. I was a target. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee, a familiar comfort in the final hours of a marathon sprint. My eyes, gritty but sharp, scanned the lines of code on the main display, a final verification. The last piece of the puzzle, the deepfake's original source code, the timestamps that proved its malicious deployment. The IP addresses cleverly routed but ultimately traceable through a series of compromised corporate servers, it all coalesced into an unassailable narrative. It wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. It was a calculated assassination, masked by digital deception, orchestrated to eliminate a threat to a colossal corporate merger. The victim hadn't simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They'd been targeted with surgical precision, their death a necessary silence. I leaned back, the swivel chair groaning in protest. The screen glowed, illuminating the faint tremor in my hands. It was done. The report, meticulously detailed, cross-referenced, and irrefutable, sat ready to be transmitted. For weeks, I'd chased a phantom, a killer who believed they'd left no physical trace, a digital ghost. But even ghosts leave echoes in the data stream if I know how to listen. And I had listened. A sharp rap on the reinforced door made me jump. I hadn't heard the vehicle approach, lost as I was in the digital ether. The chief investigator's face appeared in the small, bulletproof window, stern as ever, but with a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, anticipation, maybe. I hit the transmit button. The data packet, dense with proof, zipped away into the secure network. I opened the door. The chief investigator stepped inside, followed by two uniformed officers whose gazes swept over the array of screens and blinking lights. The unit felt suddenly smaller, the air tighter. "User EO," the chief investigator said, their voice low. "Is it in?" "It's in," I confirmed, my voice a little rough from disuse. Everything, the full chain of evidence, from the deepfake creation to the financial incentives, the orchestrators, the direct killer, the digital footprint of their entire operation, it's all there. The chief investigator nodded slowly, their eyes still fixed on me. "We received the preliminary alert. The arrests are already underway, simultaneous raids across 3 districts. A wave of something akin to relief but heavier washed over me. It wasn't the clean, light feeling I imagined justice would bring. It was a profound exhaustion, the weight of what I'd uncovered. The scope of the conspiracy, the cold ruthlessness of it still chilled me. The orchestrator, I continued, needing to verbalize it, the head of the rival tech conglomerate, the one who stood to gain billions from the merger, and the security consultant they hired, the one who had the specialized skills for the deepfake and the remote execution. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the data could be wiped clean, that the digital trail was untraceable. The chief investigator held my gaze. Thanks to I was wrong, completely wrong. There was genuine respect in their voice, an unaccustomed warmth. "This is monumental, User EO. You dismantled a sophisticated operation that would have gone undetected otherwise. You brought down some very powerful people." I looked back at my screens, at the now static images of the deepfake code, the network schematics, the encrypted communication logs. It was all so clean, so logical on the screen. But the reality of it, the human cost, was messy and brutal. Within the next few hours, my mobile forensic unit at a remote location became a hub of activity. More vehicles arrived, flashing blue lights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. Officers, forensic specialists, even a representative from the prosecutor's office, filtered in and out, reviewing the evidence, asking questions. I explained the intricacies of the data, the layers of encryption, the methods used to trace the ephemeral digital signals. Each explanation was met with nods of understanding, sometimes awe. "The public will want to know how this was done," the prosecutor's representative remarked, their gaze sharp. "How a simple robbery turned into this. They'll want to know about you." That was the part that made my stomach clench. My life, meticulously constructed around anonymity, around the quiet hum of servers and the solitude of code, was about to be obliterated. The thought of cameras, of flashing lights, of being a public figure in any capacity, sent a shiver down my spine. It was a form of exposure I hadn't truly considered until now. Later, as the sun began to paint the horizon in pale oranges and purples, the chief investigator returned to my unit. "The arrests went smoothly," they reported, a rare smile touching their lips. "They didn't even have time to react. Your evidence was so comprehensive, so immediate they were caught completely off guard. The orchestrator's initial arrogance quickly evaporated when confronted with the deepfake source code. They knew they were done." I nodded, absorbing the news. Justice. I had done my job. I had followed the data meticulously, relentlessly, but the cost. "You've been up for days," the chief investigator observed, a note of concern in their voice. "Get some rest, User EO, you've earned it. The city owes you a debt." I looked around my sanctuary, the mobile forensic unit at a remote location, which now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage where a dramatic performance had just concluded. The lingering scent of ozone, usually comforting, now felt like the ghost of the battle I'd just fought. As the others began to pack up, the chief investigator made a final comment, almost an afterthought. "You know, there's already talk about your methods, about how you operate alone outside the usual channels. Some are calling it unconventional, others miraculous." I responded nothing, my gaze drifting to the window. The world outside, once a blur I rarely engaged with, was about to demand my full attention. The tension hadn't dissipated with the arrests. It had merely shifted, transformed from the pressure of the hunt to the uncertainty of the aftermath. I had brought justice, but I had also irrevocably changed my own life, and I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for what came next. The digital ghost was gone, but now I felt like the one exposed, my own carefully constructed anonymity shattered by the very truth I'd unearthed. The air inside the mobile forensic unit at a remote location always felt recycled, a sterile hum that usually calmed me. But today, it just amplified the buzzing in my skull. The arrests had been made, the public statements delivered, the official narrative hammered into place. The orchestrator behind the digital ghosts, the architect of the deepfakes and the manipulated data streams, was no longer a phantom. The individual who'd acted as the physical hand, guided by that digital puppeteer, was also apprehended. A tidy wrap-up by most standards. I was supposed to feel relief, I think. A sense of closure. But closure felt like a concept designed for physical wounds, not the gaping, digital void this case had carved out. I ran a hand over the cool, matte surface of the server rack, the blinking lights a familiar, comforting constellation. My fingers still tingled with the ghost of 1,000 keystrokes, of sifting through oceans of data, hunting for a single malicious ripple. The detective had called it a victory. A triumph of old-school sleuthing married with cutting-edge digital forensics. He'd even offered a rare, gruff commendation, something about my unorthodox approach, yielding unprecedented results. I just nodded, my eyes already tracing the lines of code on a diagnostic screen looking for the next anomaly, because that's what this case had been, an anomaly, a breach of the expected. And now that it was solved, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was merely the first tremor of a much larger seismic event. I packed away my specialized peripherals, coiling cables with a meticulousness that bordered on ritual. Each piece of equipment, from the custom-built signal isolators to the encrypted storage arrays, felt like an extension of myself. They were my eyes into the unseen, my hands reaching into the intangible. Without them, I was just user I/O, a collection of ones and zeros myself, adrift in a world I didn't quite understand. This case had dragged me out of my self-imposed isolation, not into the bright glare of human interaction, but into the stark, unforgiving light of digital reality. It had shown me how easily truth could be bent, reshaped, and ultimately shattered by algorithms. The victim hadn't just been murdered. Their very identity had been digitally disassembled and reconstructed into a false narrative. And I had been the one to pick through the fragments, to find the original blueprint beneath the layers of deception. It was a strange sort of power, knowing that I could see the cracks in the digital veneer that others took for solid reality. It was also terrifying, because for every weakness I exposed, another, more sophisticated one seemed to emerge, like Hydra heads in the infinite expanse of the network. A low-priority alert flickered on one of my monitors, a background process I'd set up to monitor a specific type of network interference, a residual hum from the main investigation. It was supposed to be white noise, the digital equivalent of static, but something was different. The pattern wasn't random. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a faint, rhythmic pulse beneath the surface chaos. I paused, my hand hovering over a power switch. My initial thought was system residue, a ghost in the machine from the intense data processing of the past weeks. But my gut, that illogical, stubborn part of me that sometimes screamed louder than any forensic log, told me otherwise. This wasn't an echo. It was a whisper. I leaned closer, my gaze fixed on the evolving waveform. It was incredibly faint, a signature unlike anything I'd cataloged before. Not a deepfake, not a botnet, not even the sophisticated cloaking techniques used by the orchestrator. This was quieter, more organic somehow, like the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in temperature before a storm. It was too early to classify, too vague to label a threat. It could be nothing. A glitch. A phantom. But the hairs on my arms prickled. A familiar sensation that usually preceded a significant discovery. This wasn't the blunt force of a targeted attack. It was something far more insidious, a slow, creeping infiltration. The network traffic it was riding on was innocuous, distributed across countless benign channels, effectively making it invisible to standard detection protocols. It was like trying to find a single drop of dye dispersed evenly throughout an ocean. But I saw it, or rather I felt it. The pattern, the cadence, the intent behind the noise. This wasn't a human hand at the keyboard, not directly. The orchestrator had used existing tools, albeit expertly. This felt like something new being forged. My breath hitched. I had brought one digital ghost to ground, but it seemed another, perhaps even more ethereal, was already taking shape. Not for the physical threats, but for the unseen ones. The ones that operated within the very systems designed to protect the truth. My work was far from over. It had only just begun. I reached for my keyboard, my fingers already flying, chasing the faint, lingering echo.